Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of The Numbers. I'm Eric Grenier, joined as always by Philippe J. Fournier. Philippe, how you doing this week?
Good morning, Eric. It's good to see you. Good to talk to you. I'm glad we're doing this morning. We have lots to talk about. Lots of it about Quebec, but not only about Quebec. We'll go around. There was an upset last night, right? In
Yes.
P.E.I. that I missed because Wednesday night is my holy night. I play hockey on Wednesday night. But we'll have to talk about that. And how are you? How are you keeping up?
Good. Been a great week. Been enjoying the week.
Oh yeah,
Everything's
all
going
right.
well. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's nice. Let's keep it going. So we don't have as many numbers to talk about this week because there weren't really any voting intentions polls that came out and all this. But I did want to start about something and talk a little bit about what it kind of means. So yesterday, so we record this on Thursdays, yesterday Jagmeet Singh had said that he wants a Pharmacare bill by March 1st, and if he doesn't get it, the deal is over. And he was pressed on it, and as we've seen before, he's not going to say that he's going to defeat the government, all this kind of stuff. But my question for you is, and maybe we can play this out a little bit, is there anything to this? Is there anything to take seriously about this threat?
Well, the threat is because of they want a full Pharmacare program set in place before the next election. I think that's the gist of it, right? I mean, the timing of it is interesting because the Liberals did delay that program. But in the numbers, and there's been polling about this, Canadians are not clamoring, are not knocking on doors, are not screaming to have a Pharmacare program. It's the NDP that wants it. So
a lot of people have it in their private insurance with their employer.
Like me, for instance.
So I think it's a minority of Canadians that actually don't have some sort of Pharmacare program. But it does seem like primarily the NDP wants to be able to say, we got this, right? Going into the next campaign, rather than we have a promise to implement this.
I mean, I don't want to play 4D chess here, but perhaps the NDP and Jagmeet Singh are seeing that supporting the Liberals automatically is not good for them. Is not helping them, even though they could still say in the next campaign that they had advances, they had progress working with the Liberals. I am not sure how to read this. Obviously, if at some point you can make a threat, and if you never act on it, it becomes, oh yeah, sure, okay, that's cute.
Yeah.
And I don't think the NDP wants that. But what did you make of it? Because I don't think it matters that much, right? I mean, it just means that the automatic support of the Liberals will stop, but that doesn't mean that it will take down the Liberals over the budget. But what did you make of it, Eric?
Yeah, well, that was exactly what I wanted to kind of talk about, because you have Singh who says he would pull out of the deal, which to me would largely just take things away, because then they wouldn't be able to have that kind of close negotiations be brought into decisions, that kind of thing. But he's not committing to defeat the government on the next budget. And so that's really what I'm curious about, what this actually means practically speaking. Does the NDP think that it could get a bit more out of the next budget if they don't have this agreement and they can at least pretend that there's the threat that they could bring them down?
Yeah.
But then there's also the question of the Bloc Québécois and what they would do. Now, I heard Blanchette recently talk about how he has voted against every budget that the Liberals have brought forward because he was kind of being defensive against charges that from Pierre Olivier that he was supporting the Liberal government. But is he going to want to support the next budget if the NDP decides that they would pull their support? If we take a numbers perspective from this, do either of those two parties have an incentive to risk an election campaign?
No. I mean, it's rare that I have a determinate answer like this. The answer is no. There's the Bloc Québécois. I mean, we'll talk about this a bit later. Léger had the Quebec-only poll, a big sample just in Quebec. The Bloc Québécois is at 29%. So it's below their score of the past two elections. I know on average they're a bit higher than that.
But there's no certainty.
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly. I mean, there's no certainty of gains. I mean, if you want to go back to 4D chess, perhaps Blanchet is thinking, a conservative majority government of Pierre Poilievre maybe could help Quebec sovereignty. I think it's a foolish idea that has no precedent. I remember 2005, Bloc Québécois people say, Stephen Harper in power in Ottawa. We'll see. Sovereignty is going to rise up. It didn't happen. What I wonder, and I'll push back on this though. What about the point of view of the Liberals? Perhaps they want to say, you know what, the NDP, go take a hike. we'll go bill by bill, and we'll see how it goes. Perhaps we get to this point that neither party really wants to be tied to each other. It's not like the Liberal numbers is getting up. We saw a little bump in December that completely vanished. Right? There's no bump for the NDP. Half the NDP caucus is in BC. The numbers in BC are, well, they fluctuate a lot, but they're not better for the NDP. And the Bloc Québécois is still treading water around 30% mark. So who among these parties have any interest in going to early election? I don't see it.
If the NDP is actually willing to vote against upcoming budgets, that's one thing. If they do that, then that's at least taking a stand. They can say they stood up for principle, even if it means they end up being, steamrolled by the Conservatives in a lot of the country, and they end up being a small party in a majority government against the Conservatives, which is not a good outcome for them.
No.
But they have that ability to at least stand up at this point and say, we're taking a stand, line in the sand, this is it. But if they end up just pulling the agreement, and then end up voting for the budget later on, then the NDP starts to look, I would say, even weaker. Even if they manage to maybe get something out of the budget, I don't know. But if you think about when Michael Ignatieff, when he was leader, and he was constantly under pressure to defeat the government, keep the government in power, Stephen Harper, he looked pretty weak because he wasn't willing to bring down the government. The Liberals would put a token amount of MPs to go vote against the budget or whatever vote was coming up. So that at least they said they could vote against it, but they didn't put enough to defeat the government. It did not go well. So there's a big risk here, I think, for Jagmeet Singh if he starts to, saber rattle and then fold. I think that's worse than we have an active role in this legislation. We're keeping the Liberals, on track with progressive stuff, and aren't you glad we're here? So I'm curious to see how this is going to play out, because it does seem like you said, you can't just keep making a threat and then never following through. At some point, it's the boy calls wolf kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess, as you said, in the Ignatieff days, I know Ignatieff had other problems, right? We'll agree on that. But the appearance of being weak is one thing. The NDP could say, well, we'll all abstain except for one vote. The leader is going to vote against, and then the effect is that the budget passes, right? Thing is, the Bloc Québécois is in a different position. That it's not in a weak position. It's in I don't really care position. The Bloc Québécois could turn around and say, well, we brought more to Quebec because that's all we care about, and work with the Liberals on a piece-to-piece. But I mean, the Bloc Québécois has no incentive to go into an election, but it would not be disastrous for them unless they have a really bad campaign. So the Liberals have two potential dance partners, and so that's why I think the NDP's position could be kind of weak. But then again, perhaps we'll be surprised. But it's not like in the past few years the NDP has surprised us positively on their strategy, right? It's not like they proved to be master strategists in the House of Commons. There's always time, I guess.
Let's move on to it.
If you had a bet, if you had a bet on what would happen, like what's your impression? If you had a prediction to make, we're just having fun here. Like, what would you say will happen? What's the most likely outcome?
That they don't pull out of the agreement, and this goes away in a few weeks. There's also the part where maybe Jagmeet Singh knows that the Liberals are going to come forward with something before the end of February, and so is trying to make it seem like he's getting it, right?
Getting tough.
That's the strategy to play. If I was the Liberals, I would be a little annoyed at it, if that's indeed what happens. So we'll see. Of course, it's kind of a risky gamble whenever you do anything like this. But my gut tells me that they will not pull out of the agreement because I don't think that they're willing to vote against the government to defeat it. So then what's the point? I think you just weaken your hand. You have a weak hand right now. You have an even weaker hand if you're not even part of the team, but you're still backing the government. I think that's the worst outcome out of all of them. Either be against them or be a partner and have some claim to whatever's being brought forward by the government. So,
what was it again? The Paul Wells rule of Canadian politics that he wrote in Maclean's. Yeah. The first one was, for any given situation, Canadian politics will tend towards the least exciting possible outcome.
Yeah.
So I think your prediction is the most likely to occur. I concur, but we'll see how it goes. Hey, it's going to give us plenty to talk about if something happens in it, because it's soon, right? The budget is in April, so this is soon. But the Pharmacare again, I know. I'm not saying that Pharmacare is not important. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying the numbers show that it's not a major issue for Canadians, and it would cost a lot of money at a time where the Liberals want to, show Canadians and the Conservatives that they are better economic, financial managers. It's a no-win situation for the Liberals again.
I wanted to talk about a poll that came out, and I guess some news. There was on Ukraine. There was the Ukraine-Canada free trade agreement that was voted on, and the Conservatives voted against it, saying because there's a part of it about carbon taxes in it. Regardless of what the justification is for it, which seems kind of flimsy, because the Ukrainians already have a carbon tax in place, and it's part of the negotiation things when it comes to joining the European Union. Whatever.
That's not the point.
I did see something kind of funny. Okay, so the what started this was the poll. Not the voting was what started it, and then Angus Reid Institute did a poll on whether Canadians think that we're doing enough or not doing enough for Ukraine. And the result that grabbed a lot of headlines, that the amount of people who said we're doing too much for Ukraine, too much support to Ukraine, has grown to 25%, up from 13% in the months after the initial invasion by Russia. And then among Conservative supporters, that's where most of the increase has been. Yeah. And it's 43% of Conservative voters who think we're doing too much for Ukraine. When Poilievre was presented with this information in a scrum, I think it was on Wednesday, he said it was because of the carbon tax in the free trade agreement. I'm not sure if he misunderstood the question, but the idea that Conservative voters think we're doing too much to support Ukraine because of the carbon tax thing, the free trade agreement, seemed like a bit of a stretch. But it does kind of explain why maybe the Conservatives think that they can kind of play both sides on this. I did want to talk a little bit about the poll itself, but do you have any initial thoughts on this issue?
The Conservative leader, we should not be surprised that he plays to both sides, because there are both sides in his party. There's no major disagreement on Ukraine among Liberals or NDP. It's not unanimous, obviously, nothing is, but there's a broad consensus which doesn't exist among Conservatives. Some of it, we know where it's from. Some of it's Conservatives that watch a lot of American media, that watch Fox News, that were applauding Tucker Carlson. They are a minority of conservative movement in this country, but they are a vocal one. And there's also a fraction of those that have legitimate concern that we're spending a lot of money on this. Sure. There are pro-Russians people out there, but they are a minority. It's just that when we hear the announcements of millions and billions and then weapons, then at some point, okay, but it's been 2 years. So there is a legitimate concern. It's just that you have to realize that if you're against Ukraine resisting the Russian invasion, whether you want it or not, that means you're pro-Russia. And you don't want to be pro-Russia for many people. But it's a tough spot to be in for Pierre Poilievre, but he plays both sides because there are both sides in his party. So,
a lot of the Ukrainian Canadians are largely in ridings that are held by the Conservatives, but also ones that they win by such massive margins that it probably doesn't matter, even if they lost some of their support over this. So, it is a bit of a delicate balancing act, I guess, though. if you're playing for the larger group of people, generally speaking, you would have a more in his public statements, he says he still is very supportive of Ukraine, that they, fighting against Russia and all this kind of stuff. But it is opening him up to these attacks from the Liberals, because, as we always say, and we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, if you're explaining you're losing, it's a lot easier for the Liberals to say they voted against this free trade agreement than for the Conservatives to say, no, but it was because of carbon tax. We actually support Ukraine. Like, even if it's 100% true, it's worse than just not having to say that.
Also, worth to say, I mean, this agreement was negotiated between nations, right? And it was agreed.
Yeah, Ukraine wants it.
So it's not those who say that Canadian is imposing a carbon tax on Ukraine. I mean, come on there. Please, don't. We're not fools. That's not the case at all. But okay. The Conservative Party is a big coalition in this country. It's
also a bigger one, right?
It's now a bigger one. That's true.
When they were 10 points lower in support, it was a much more concentrated kind of group of people.
Also, to be fair, though, if the current polls showed what we saw in most of 2021, let's say the Liberals are up by 6 or 7 points, and the Conservatives in the seat projections are just around 120 or something. I don't think the pressure on Poilievre would be that high. I mean, the question would still arise, but now the thing is, Poilievre is seen as the prime minister in waiting. So that's why those questions are important, because, okay, if you win a year and a half from now, and the war probably won't be over, then what? Right? I mean, we're part of NATO. NATO it was formed to protect ourselves against back then it was the USSR, but you know what I mean, with Russian aggression. So if you don't abide by that, I know Ukraine is not part of NATO, but it's still in Europe. I don't know. It's. I'm not an expert on geopolitics, and I don't want to pretend to be one. I'm looking at the numbers right now, and I see why Poilievre is doing this. The numbers say that he doesn't want to lose supporters on either side.
So the one of the things I wanted to talk about this poll in particular, is because it got a lot of attention and it also drove a lot of conversation, is that this is a case where it's really important to look at how the questions are posed.
The wording.
Especially since we're talking about the change in support over time. Now, what the Angus Reid Institute has done here, and they've done this in other polls as well, and we can discuss whether this is a good idea or not, is that it's not just asking the question, like, are we doing too much to support Ukraine? Are we not doing enough? They did have a preamble, all right? So I'm going to read you the preamble. Do you know the preamble?
I don't think I do. Go ahead.
Okay, so then we'll see. So this is the preamble to the question. In the past year, there has been little change in territory on either side as both combatants have dug into their respective positions. The war continues. The Canadian government has provided support to Ukraine throughout the conflict, including more than $2.4 billion in military assistance. The Canadian government has also implemented sanctions against Russian individuals, businesses, and government in response to the invasion. Canada, along with other NATO allies, have pledged moral and practical support for Ukraine against Russia, but as the war drags on, there have been discussions about Canada's role in helping Ukraine. Then they ask how they feel about various elements of support, and then a question is, looking at this another way, do you think Canada has been providing too much support, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The thing is that this preamble is not the same as the preamble that was in the last sets of questions, right? Because the situation was different. What you put in the preamble is going to have an impact on the question. And so It makes it a bit more difficult to compare polls over time. Now, if you agree or disagree with the preamble, that's one thing. The preamble does kind of emphasize that this has been a long war and things don't seem to be changing.
Yeah.
Which to me might condition a response that say, like, yeah, well, if nothing's happening, then why are we bothered? But so I do have a little bit of an issue with that. I'm not saying the preamble is wrong, but it does have an impact on what the answer is going to be to the question. And when you compare it to the one that was done before, which, had different numbers, had a different context in terms of how the war was going.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, the preamble doesn't, there's nothing factually wrong with it.
No.
But it does change the context. Some people would say, well, the context changes for the poll because the context in the war changed. But again, yeah, when you compare poll results, make sure you have the same wording and the same. I mean, if the person you are polling is ignorant, that's not your fault. That's that's part of the big sample. Some people do not know what's going on, or only watch a certain set of news that will give them, biased information. Yeah, I.
See, the thing is,
yeah.
there's a danger in asking people their opinion on things they don't know anything about, right?
Yeah.
So I can see the argument being that we should provide them with some information. But then to me, it's not as much then at that point that you're questioning people's opinions, their pre-existing opinions, but they're saying, here's what the situation is. What do you think of it? Yeah. Which is not an illegitimate way to do it. If you were doing like a focus group, that kind of thing, you want to know what people think. But I do think that there is... there does need to be a little bit of caution in terms of how we're approaching the numbers in this case, especially, like I said, when comparing it to the previous one. Because the answer to the questions in the context that's provided is completely legitimate, but does it compare to the question that was asked last year or 2 years ago, when the preamble, the explanation of the situation might have been different? So I just wanted to point this out because it got a lot of attention, this poll, but this is probably something that needs to be understood and taken into account as well.
Also in this poll, if I may, the Angus Institute, so what should Ukraine do at this point? And there were three options: continue fighting until we reclaim all Russian-occupied land, including Crimea. The second option was continue fighting until it reclaims only land Russia has occupied since February 22. And the other one was negotiate for peace now, forfeiting all land Russia currently holds. And that third option, forfeiting basically whatever Russia has won so far, 28% among conservatives. That's the highest. It's 11% among liberals, 14% among NDP, 10% among Bloc, so 3 times as much almost. It's also the most popular. It has the plurality of answers among conservatives. It's a difficult issue, thinking that if you forfeit territory and land to Russia, thinking now it's going to appease them, they won't do it anymore, they will stop there. That's why this shows to me the fraction of the CPC that are not skeptic about Ukraine, but that are pro-Russia, and it's bothersome. But what can you do? I mean, you have south of the border, the Republicans are trying to block everything they can on the orders of Donald Trump to not give aid to Ukraine anymore. Perhaps there's just a bit of confusion there because of that.
I think absolutely the impact of American media is huge. So I think that you can't ignore that. It's also with the trans issues that's been raised over the last little while. It is in a large part driven, or at least amplified by the conversation in the United States. So it would be wrong to think that this issue would be immune to that, right? And certainly the Republicans have taken a much stronger kind of support for Ukraine. I'm not going to say it's pro-Russia or anti-Ukraine, but than the conservatives have here. But that will undoubtedly have an impact on their supporters, who are watching a lot of the kind of media that Republican supporters in the United States watch. So it's kind of inevitable this is going to happen. But it's either you kind of go along with it, or you kind of try to mitigate it, you go against it. I guess that'll be the choice we'll see. Increasingly, they're going to have to make that choice over the next couple of years.
This is a new Cold War. I mean, it won't take that name, obviously,
hot.
But this is a new Cold War, and the Republicans south of the border tend to lean Russia. So it's a big problem. It was not the case during the first Cold War. So
no.
Okay, that's a bit heavy.
Let's talk about the Quebec poll, because again, it got a lot of attention. So this was a poll by Léger that came out just a couple days ago. It had 32% support for the Parti québécois, 25% support for the Coalition Avenir Québec, 16% for Québec Solidaire, 15% for the Liberals, and 11% for the Quebec Conservatives. So this is the provincial level numbers. Not a lot of change It was only a point or two here. I think actually it was just 1 point for each of the parties since Léger was last in the field before Christmas. We talked about the Palace data poll last week. So there's not a lot of differences here. The CAC a little higher, the CAQ was a little lower in the Palace poll. But this does seem to at least confirm that the Parti Québécois gains that it made are, at least for now, they're holding.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The 32% for the Parti Québécois is a big jump. Let's recall for our listeners that may not know, the Parti Québécois had 15% of the vote in the election less than a year and a half ago. So the polls have been climbing slowly. The optimist would say, well, we were steady now on top. The optimist would say, well, we stopped growing, right? But you can't grow by 5 or 6 points every month. That's not going to happen. The shift has already happened. It happened throughout the summer and the fall. And now we see a stabilization of the numbers for the Parti Québécois. For the CAQ, this is a good poll for them. Palace had 21% for the CAQ. This one has 25%. So you could, split the apple in the middle and say it's somewhere maybe 23 or 24. The CAQ would still lose badly in an election if that was the case. Trailing in the Montreal suburbs, trailing in Quebec City, badly in Quebec City. Trailing in the regions and trailing again among Francophone voters. So this is
where they have seats.
Trailing everywhere where they have seats. So they would get crushed. However, the pressure will be on, and on the Parti Québécois and Paul Saint-Pierre, and we saw this in the media this week. Coming with those polls, the National Assembly has started its winter sitting, and so there will be a lot of questions. Again, like Pierre Poilievre at the federal level, now Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon has to look like a future premier, and he will get asked questions like a premier, questions that are not asked to Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois or Éric Duhem or Marc Tanguay. Because he's the one in the lead, and he's the one who convinced disappointed CAQ voters to join his fold for now. I don't know.
Well, as you said,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying. For me, again, you look at the francophone, la majorité francophone, the 80% of francophones. That if you win that bloc, you're really hard to dislodge. When the Parti Québécois only had one opponent in the Liberals, being tied in voting intentions, meaning you win a majority. The Liberals had to win by many points to secure a victory, Jean Charest and the others. The CAQ still has time, but it will have to change some of its messaging. And I really wonder whether they will attack M. Plamondon on the sovereignty issue. Because the CAQ is nationalist, right? That's what they say. We're nationalists. And many people, not the CAQ himself, but many observers says, okay, it's like the PQ without a referendum. Others would say, no, it's like the Liberals without the referendum talk or the referendum fear. I'm really curious where they go on this. Or do they just decide to be good managers of the economy?
Well, the line that the CQ used before was that, these were chicanes, these were fights, they were, and Quebecers are past that. And, they're not necessarily wrong because the Léger poll had sovereignty numbers 35% for, 56% against. The Palace data poll had 41% for and I think 48% against,
That's
so
right.
a bit closer.
That's right.
But you're still talking about most Quebecers, or at least the most Quebecers, being against sovereignty. And the numbers really, for really talking about the last 20 years, have always been around these, right?
Yeah.
So we're not seeing this increase for support for sovereignty. But you mentioned questions that Saint-Pierre Plamondon is getting asked. One of them was this week whether he would hold a referendum even if he didn't win a majority. And he said that he would put forward the legislation to have a referendum, and then if it passes, it passes. So the intent is that if the Parti Québécois does win, that there will be at least an attempt to have a referendum in a first mandate. And whether or not it can win with these numbers, like when there were times ahead of the 95 referendum where the numbers weren't that dissimilar. There was times ahead of the 1980 referendum where the numbers were a lot worse, and they ended up getting 40% then. So just because it's low now doesn't mean that it will stay low in the midst of a campaign. Obviously, they would have to do a lot of work to get the number up to 50, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're off. So if you're in the rest of the country, the next 5 years, not 5 years, but I guess the next election is 2026. So
5 years.
The next 7 years, at least,
Yeah.
there could be a referendum.
And we're at the era of social media, right?
Yeah.
And this is a big change because just looking at the MP for Jonquière, Alexis Brunel-Duceppe, the son of Gilles Duceppe, is just retweeting and quote tweeting trolls from the West that say Quebecers, you want to leave because you're just sucking up this country dry. And we know there are people that think like that. We know that, but it wasn't amplified in '95.
Yeah.
So
there was it was in '95 or 1980. I can't remember, where there was a video of people in Brockville.
Yeah, but stepping on the flag,
stamping on it, and
95.
burning Quebec flag, and it was a big deal.
It was a big deal. Yeah.
That's going to be a daily occurrence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we grow into this social media era, I think a lot of people are getting immune to that. But the conversation online will be unbearable. But I guess that's part of. I mean, Brexit in Europe was kind of the same deal, right? There was a lot of insults thrown around, free insults from trolls, and now we know there's been Russian disinformation, and there are countries that would like to see Canada being dismantled. And I'm not saying it's. I mean, I know some sovereigntists are listening to me right now and go like, "Hey, hang on, that's not why we want to do sovereignty." I know. There are entirely legitimate reasons to promote Quebec sovereignty, and many of them will be brought to the fold in a campaign. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. But
if we get there, yeah.
I mean, if the PQ was polling at 19% right now, we would not be talking about this. But they're polling at 32%, and the CEQ is in trouble. They didn't have a great week last week, the CEQ. They talked about party financing.
They haven't had great weeks in a while.
It's been quite a while, right? And what do you think we're going to talk about in the fall? The Los Angeles Kings are going to come for their practice runs against the Florida Panthers, who gives a whatever, and it's going to come back to the forefront. So anyway, the sovereignty numbers. I wanted to ask you. So 35% for in the Léger poll, 41% for in the Palace poll. Now, when I saw the numbers from Palace, I must say they made me a bit uncomfortable. Because it's a random sample, and when you look at the subsample, everything is mostly in line with what we've seen, except for the young voters. The young vote is a small samples because it's really hard to get young people to answer polls on the phone. It's a small sample, but it's 3 polls right now, consecutive polls from Palace Data in September, in November, now in January, that all showed that young voters in Quebec are, on average, more sovereigntist than the average voter. And Léger shows the exact opposite. And I have the numbers. I have the numbers here. In the Léger poll, young voters 33% for, 58 against. In Palace, it's 47 for, 41 against. Small sample, but still, this is a big gap. And I'm guessing it's because of the mode, right? The polling mode. I'm not sure what to do with this.
And historically, it's been a long kind of running thing that the Parti Québécois and the sovereignty movement has been struggling because it hasn't been reverberating, hasn't been reaching young voters. And there's been the talk that it was a project of a generation, the generation of the baby boomers and the people who voted for Lévesque and Parizeau. So if this is a newer development that younger voters are starting to become a bit more sovereignist, then that would have a huge impact, I think, because then the notion for the Parti Québécois that with every day that passes, the chances of winning a referendum get worse start to become less true. But because it's something that goes against the historical trend, it does make you wonder and raise an eyebrow about whether these are really the case. Now, if it wasn't, then, we're talking about sovereignty numbers again in the mid-30s. So it's not a huge difference, 41 and, say, 35, 36, 37. But it does change a bit of the dynamic, the conversation, if sovereignty is over 40% and if it's under 40%.
It does, yeah. I mean, even though it's one reasonable person in numbers who could say, well, okay, Léger said 35 and Palace says 41. Okay, let's agree on 37, right? It's just, it still bugs me. Because also, to go back to that Léger poll, so the voting intentions between the two polls are almost identical, right? Mm-hmm. And Léger, in his young voters sample, has the Parti québécois going up. Québec solidaire is still in first place, leading by 9 points. A young among voters. Parti québécois is second, so it's 36 to 27. The previous Léger poll, Québec solidaire was leading by 17 over the Parti québécois. So in the same poll, Léger sees a rise of support for the Parti québécois among young voters, doesn't see movement for sovereignty among none. So this tells you something. That's why the sovereignty question in a Quebec poll is so important, because it helps you explain the dynamics. It's not linear, right? So,
because if you look at the Parti québécois and Québec solidaire, two sovereigntist parties, have majority support among young voters. But we know that a lot of Québec solidaire voters are primarily progressives first, and sovereignists second, if at all, right? So some of these numbers kind of match up, but then they kind of don't. And if you're doing Venn diagrams of it all, it would be a complicated kind of graph, right?
Oh, my God, yeah. Québec solidaire, are you, if a referendum on Quebec sovereignty occurred, would you vote for or against? 32, sorry. 32 against 59. Which
less
means
than the population as a whole.
So Québec solidaire voters as a whole would be a bit less sovereigntist than the average Quebec voter. If you say it's a small sample, you're right. It's only 162 Québec solidaire voters that answer this, but this is something we've seen in every poll.
Yeah.
That Québec solidaire voters are split, and usually the split tends to lean towards the against sovereignty. So very, very interesting dynamics. I mean, it's not going to be a boring cycle in Quebec politics for all those reasons. And the Parti québécois, so in Léger sees 32% for the Parti québécois and sovereignty at 35%. That's close to a ceiling. You know, it's enough to win an election, especially with 5 parties in double digits, but that's close to a ceiling. It'll be very interesting. I'll update my Quebec projection. It won't change much. The CAQ will go up a bit because of that Léger poll, but I'll do that or before the weekend.
All right, let's move to another province, Prince Edward Island.
Yeah, what happened?
Earth-shattering by-election results. I'm sure you heard about it. This is in the riding of Borden-Kincora, which if you've been to P.E.I, you've probably been to, because this is where the bridge goes. So, if you take the bridge to go to P.E.I, you've driven through this riding. So Borden-Kincora, this was a riding that was held by Jamie Foxx, who was a well-known comedian. He's been in lots of movies. No, he was a cabinet minister in Dennis King's PC government. And he wants to run. He's going to run. He'll be the Conservative candidate federally in Malpeque. So he resigned his seat. He has held it since 2015. He won it by huge margin in the last election. The Greens won this seat. Matt McFarlane of the Greens, who has been the candidate now, I think, for at least 2 elections, if not more, won 49% of the vote. Turnout was pretty high. It was like 59%. And they had a massive snowstorm. So big that it was the by-election was delayed twice.
That's true.
So, Islanders, good credit to you. Go out and out to vote. Love it. 49% for Matt McFarlane, 39% for the PCs, 11% for the Liberals. It was a swing of 36 points from the PCs to the Greens. Gives the Greens 3 seats in the legislature, the same number as the Liberals. There could be a fight for the official opposition role. Probably goes to the incumbent, which is the Liberals. But and the Greens are killing it in by-elections.
So how shocking was this on a scale from, let's say, 1 to 10? Like, is this, because I don't want to minimize here. You called me a snob in text messages, right?
I think it was big city snob. Ooh, I'm from Montreal.
How big is this, though? Because this is a massive surprise. I see the progressive conservative number in the general election. So you said it was a big swing in percentage, but in actual votes. So it was 1,700 votes, and the Progressive Conservative candidate had just under 1,000. So that's still a pretty big fall for the Conservatives. The Greens went from 995 votes in a general to 1,200 in a by-election. So you increase your total vote count in absolute numbers for a by-election. That's pretty good, but I'm glad I didn't do a projection for this because I would not have. I mean, the general polls that we saw in P.E.I, I know we only have narrative research. Have they shown a green surge anywhere? No, we no. So this is a hyper local effect, right?
Yeah. Well, if any of you were listening or watching to the podcast I did last week, we talked about this by-election.
Yeah.
And healthcare, as we know, is a big issue everywhere, and it's especially become a big issue in P.E.I. So it's possible that this was a little bit of a protest vote against the Dennis King government and whether they've delivered or not on the healthcare files. So I find there's a few lessons here, and one of the things that is surprising is that this is a government that's in place now. We know that incumbent governments can have difficulties in by-elections, but generally in Atlantic Canada, the history has been it's good to be on the side of the government, right?
Yeah.
And voters here decided they wanted to be on the opposition, and they voted for the Greens, who are a viable party in Prince Edward Island. They finished second in the vote in the last election. But it's just interesting that the Greens are able to kind of organize their way to winning by-elections, putting lots of resources into it, getting candidates who are at least well-known or run on several occasions, as this Matt McFarlane has, and that the healthcare file can be really, really dangerous for an incumbent government if you're seen to not be taking it seriously. We saw this in Manitoba in the last election. We saw this in Nova Scotia back in 2021. I know it's a little by-election in a small province, but there's still lessons that I think are there for other parties. So it's an interesting outcome. Now, the next election in P.E.I. is not until 2027. So this isn't having an impact there. But anyway, it's a surprising result that there was a swing this strong towards a small opposition party, right? So
although we have
credit to the Greens.
Yeah, the Liberals did have a good swing too. They went from 0 to 11%. They didn't have a candidate.
They didn't have a candidate next time. Yeah. So that's like an infinity increase. The percentage increase there was like you can't calculate it. It's so amazing.
So, question for you, and I saw you tweeted about this. Official opposition in Quebec. I remember the 2018 election. Both the Parti Québécois and Québec solidaire had 10 seats apiece.
Forgot about that.
It was not for official opposition, but for third-party status.
Yeah.
And the National Assembly stated that, the tiebreaker is the vote in a general election. So for a little while, the Parti Québécois was the third party. Now, of course, they lost an M&A during the mandate, so they became the fourth party. So how does it work here? Because the PCs are government.
That's the question.
And now you have 3 Greens and 3 Liberals. Is that correct? Yeah?
Yeah. There's been several cases of this happening in the past. And so I had found it. Someone else had done the research on it. I can't remember the person's name. I think it was Borden or something like that. So my apologies. But so there was a case that's happened in New Brunswick. And there are 2 parties. The Confederation of Regions Party kept on losing MLAs, and so at some point they were tied with the others, and the speaker ruled that incumbency mattered there. So the Confederation of Regions was the opposition, so it remained the opposition. There's been some other cases where that has been the decision of the speaker, but there are some other cases where there's a case in Saskatchewan, I think in the 70s, where the Liberals and the Conservatives had the same number of seats, and they gave both party leaders the role of official opposition. Okay. In Yukon, this happened after an election, and I think they made the same decision that they did in Quebec, where it was based on popular vote. Yeah. And there was a case in Alberta where there was 2 independents and 2 New Democrats, and they went to the New Democrats because they got the more of the vote. But it does seem like the recent precedent over the last couple of decades has been incumbency. So I think that the Liberals will probably end up being the official opposition, but this will be up to the speaker. There isn't like a rule. It'll be up to the speaker to decide.
Very interesting. seriously. But good for the Greens. I mean, that's 2 by-election wins in a calendar year so far. They'll take
if this trend continues.
Oh, well, there you go.
All right, let's get to some questions.
Yeah, questions, mailbag. You want to take it? Go first, my friend.
We got quite a few as usual. So we ask questions for members of our Patreon on Discord and on Patreon. So this is how we have these questions, and you get our exclusive episodes as well. We had one last week. If you missed it, then you can join the Patreon at thenumberspod.ca, and you can listen to it and the one that we'll have next week. So we'll start with some federal questions. We got this from Joey from the Bloc on Discord. And he was saying people keep talking about the Conservative advantage in fundraising, but what's the actual effect of their spending on polling and results?
Yeah, we talked about this last week with the massive numbers for the Conservatives. I think it was 35 million. So what do you think?
Well, I think there's two different things. I wrote about it on my newsletter this week. But first of all, if you have eyes and ears and you see things, you can see that the Conservatives have ads running on TV in places, and the Liberals don't.
Yeah.
Probably because the Conservatives have money and the Liberals don't. If you go on Facebook, Facebook has the ability to look at ads that organizations are running. So you can see that the Conservatives and the Pierre Poilievre Facebook page are currently running somewhere around 430 ads, I think it was. And when I went through all the numbers, because Facebook shows the range of money that's been spent on them, probably talking somewhere around $250,000.
Wow.
On these ads that are currently running. If you go to the Liberal page and Justin Trudeau's page, the number of ads are somewhere in the 200s, so they're running about half as many ads, and the spend on them is far lower. It might be around $25,000. So you have that the Conservatives are able to have twice as many ads running on Facebook and spending about 10 times as much money on it.
Wow. Yeah.
Whether that's just a Facebook thing, who knows? Maybe the Liberals decide that they don't like Facebook. I don't know. But if this is being replicated elsewhere on YouTube, on Twitter, on Google, places like that, that's a huge advantage. And when the Conservatives made their big gains last summer, they coincided with their big TV ad buy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So correlation is not causation, but I mean, the evidence seems to suggest that it's, at the very least, not hurting.
Question from Pierre Olivier in a Discord. Because of the game Poirier is playing, does it make him more susceptible to Bernier during elections? I'm not sure the wording of the question here, but I mean, is there?
I'd asked for some clarification on it.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So this is what he said, because I didn't quite understand it enough. But he said since Poilievre is adopting and kind of normalizing some of the positions that the PPC had in the last election, is he, as we say, increasing the Overton window to issues that make discussing things that the PPC might have discussed in the last election more normal, which then makes it easier for the PPC to get a hearing? I thought it was an interesting idea. The Overton window is the idea that if the public's views on issues are shifted, then the public is willing to consider more extreme ideas than they might have been in the past. So I thought it was just an interesting idea. The fact that Pierre Poilievre has been going after the PPC vote and has been successful at it, does it make the PPC more acceptable for voters who in the past might have thought that it wasn't? Yeah.
The widening or the shifting of the Overton window. The thing is, it's never... For many conservative voters, let's say 2021, Maxime Bernier was a bit out there, but he was not as much as unacceptable. I think Maxime Bernier was unacceptable for many people, on the broad left, right? So shifting maybe within his own party, maybe a little bit. The thing is, let's recall, the PPC had just under 5% of the vote. That's not a big share of the pie, and it did not matter much because the PPC had most votes where the Conservatives were already dominating. But it's a good question. I am not sure of that answer. I'm not sure what to answer. I think in hindsight, it will be easier to answer this. But I don't think... The thing is, Maxime Bernier has vanished, right, from the public view. He's online tweeting his stuff, and he's still. I mean, we saw the fundraising number; they're doing okay, right? But it's not like he's driving much agenda. And Pierre Poilievre, as we saw, it's not that he took policies from the PPC, but he took a bit of the attitude, right, the in-your-face attitude. Yeah. And that resonates with many voters that are tired of government. This attitude would not have worked in 2017, for instance, right? Justin Trudeau won power with sunny ways and optimistic attitude. I'm not sure he can win in 2025 with this, unless the economy magically becomes much better for everybody. But that's another question. Interesting.
Yeah. I think my answer would be that it theoretically it will, but I think the actual impact is that it makes the PPC less relevant. Because so I think in the end, it would require that the Conservative campaign collapse or something like that for it to help the PPC. I think the more likely outcome is that the PPC ends up getting squeezed entirely. How about we move? Well, we kind of already discussed it in Quebec, so let's move to Alberta, which I thought was funny. Because I had this conversation with someone actually,
and then she.
I didn't record who asked this question. My apologies. I just have the question in front of me. So anyway, Naheed Nenshi for the Alberta NDP leadership. He says, "Smoke and mirrors, or is there something about it? Is Naheed Nenshi the Denis Coderre of the West?"
That is so unfair. Come on,
the Bernard Lord, maybe the Frank McKenna. If you want to go back even further,
hang on, Carney. Naheed Nenshi won 7. How many elections did he win? Was it 3? 4?
Yeah, it was 3.
And it was recent. I mean, So come on, Denis Coderre hasn't won anything in a decade, and please don't. I sound like such a Denis Coderre hater. I am not. I'm just looking at the numbers and I don't understand what the buzz is about. Naheed Nenshi, I mean, is he still relevant in Alberta politics? From what I've read and heard, I follow the podcast in Alberta, I follow the news in Alberta. I think he's still very much relevant. But, I mean, the NDP we know has to grow in Calgary to win an election. No choice. Can a former mayor, a successful mayor, I would say. I mean, I know a lot of people dislike him, but you look at the record, it's not Denis Coderre again, right? It's not Denis Coderre.
He won. Please. He didn't lose. Yeah.
He didn't lose, and I think he never lost, right? He left before he lost, right?
He just didn't run again in 2021 or whenever it was.
So Denis Coderre lost badly, and then decided to go, you know what, I'm going to go back in politics, and lost even badly or whatever.
I think it's interesting, though, if he'll run. Like he always had this non-partisan approach. Like purple was always the color he adopted, combination of liberal and conservative. And I just wonder how many New Democrats are really going to see him as being one of them, right? And he might excite some people, but he wouldn't have a huge amount of time to sign up members. So I think he would be up against it a little bit. But if he gets in, that'll certainly get national attention. Naheed Nenshi is a national figure, I would say. He's been on lots of shows and stuff like that. Whereas the candidates who we're already hearing are getting into the race, Sarah Hoffman, Kathleen Ganley, people like that, not known outside of Alberta. So whether that matters or not doesn't matter, I guess. But it'll people will start talking about it if he gets in the race.
And it's going to make the debates there.
Oh, and he's a good debater too.
Oh, yes,
he's a very smart guy.
All right.
Let's finish on this. I thought this was a funny one and an interesting one. John 202 on the Discord. What current provincial party, if directly exported to the federal level in its current iteration ideology, would be the most electorally successful?
I have a few answers.
I'm not even sure what my answers are. I don't really have.
Well, there's one pretty obvious one that's already done it. The Parti Québécois exported himself in Ottawa in the Bloc Québécois, and then boom, became the official opposition in their first election. And they had troubles in 2011 and 2015, but have had a plurality or a majority of the seats in Quebec for many elections. None the latest ones. I think it would be the Ontario PC, I guess, right?
Yeah, that was my thought. Yeah,
I mean, it's the PCs since Mike Harris came into the scene. The PCs have never had under 30% of the vote, unless I'm saying this. No, they've never had less than 30% of the vote in general election. They always perform well. I'm not sure. I mean, not the UCP, not the Saskatchewan Party. No offense to them. I would guess it would be. I mean, 4 years ago, I would have said the Quebec Liberals are just, they are a machine, but now that's not the case anymore. But yeah, the Parti Québécois and the Bloc Québécois, cousins. That's my answer.
The one thing I was thinking about, you think of the Ontario PCs, maybe the Nova Scotia PCs, parties that are kind of those red Tory moderate parties, and how that should be a recipe for success. But the Conservatives under Poilievre are scoring over 40% in polls, and they're not a red Tory party. So maybe
they're not in power
maybe
either.
the Conservatives right now are the answer. That they are the ones who have at least for the time being the recipe in place for doing well.
Huh.
Are you ready for your quiz?
Well, okay. So, no, I'm not, because you didn't tell me anything about the quiz, right?
I told you it was provincial premiers.
Yeah, well, that really helps, right? Oh, the theme, Philippe, is elections. I'm not ready for the quiz,
Politics.
but I'm ready to be humiliated. So
okay.
let's
I did not design this quiz for you. I'll have to be honest. So I'm not expecting you to do that well.
Who did you design it to? For?
Our audience, our listeners from around the country who will know the answers to some of these, whether you do or not.
That's fair.
So I'm hoping that at the very least this could be interesting for the audience. And I've tried to make sure that for some of the answers, there's at least a little thing that you can take home, that you learn a little bit about what the answers are. So we are looking for the longest serving premiers in the country. In history.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you the province. You tell me who was the longest serving premier of that province. If you get the first person, you get 3 points. And then you can name, if you want, you can try to name the second and the third. And I'll give you 2 points for the second, 1 point for the third. If you name one of them who was second or third, I'll give you points for them, but then you're done for that province. Okay? So if you can name in order, first, second, third, you can get 6 points per province. If you can just name a random premier and you think maybe they're top ones, you can still get some points. Now, this is going to be tough. There are 60 points you could get, but because I ran it and I tried to guess how well could Philippe do, I'm going to say that if you get 15 points, you will have passed. You will have 1. If you get 10, you'll get a pass.
Point of order. The longest serving premiers, does it have to be consecutive? Or it's just the total time in office? Total time in office. Okay. Because there's been some comebacks, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for listeners, get your pens out and see how well you can do, because I'm curious to know how well many of you can do. All right. So we're going to start from smallest province to biggest province.
Oh, God. Okay.
Prince Edward Island. Who was the longest serving premier of Prince Edward Island? And again, if you can just name one and he's one of the top 3, I'll give you some points for that.
Do I get to... Okay, so... Okay. As a small, fair hint, could you at least give me a range? Like, was it 25 years or was it 9 years? Or is that fair to ask? So how long was the longest premier of P.E.I. in power?
The longest serving premier in P.E.I. was in power for 12 years.
Okay. Which means it wasn't recent. Okay. I don't think I can go much further back than my lifetime, and I don't think that 12 years was in my lifetime. So, I'm going to say... Hang on, 12 years? That's a long time. Okay, I'm going to go with the ones I know. I'm sure if it's like a few years after Confederation, which it probably is, I don't know. I'm going to say Pat Binns. I think he was there for a decade. Is that
he was second.
He was second? Okay.
You got 2 points out of that. That's not too bad.
But I have to stop here. Okay.
Yeah, now you're done. Yeah, you got to get it right. So the longest serving premier was Alexander Campbell, who served from 1966 to 1978. He was only 32 when he was elected. Wow. Pat Binns was second, and William Wilfred Sullivan who was there in the 19th century, was third. Okay, 2 points out of P.E.I. Not too bad. I didn't think you'd get any points out of P.E.I.
Well, a lifetime again. I don't know the 30s in P.E.I. Sorry, Islanders.
Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay.
Now, there's fewer premiers, only in Confederation in 1949. Who was the longest-serving premier in Newfoundland and Labrador's history? He was there for 23 years.
23 years? Really? Okay, that's not the one I thought then. But hang on, Newfoundland and Labrador had premiers before Confederation. We're just doing
yes,
not
but we're talking about provincial
joining
premiers.
Confederation. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. 23 years. That is a long. That has to be among the longest in the country.
Yes,
that has to be up there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's not him, but I'm hoping he is in the top 3 because he was there for a decade. I'm going to say Danny Williams.
No, the longest serving was Joey Smallwood, who brought Newfoundland and Labrador into Confederation. And here's a little point. In his first 6 elections, he won 182 of 212 seats, 86% of the seats. So he dominated the province from 1949 to 1972. The other 2 were Brian Peckford and Frank Moores, who were in the 70s and 80s. So that's 0 points for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, wow. 6 elections he won? Wow, that's 6
well, he
crushing
won a
wins,
7th
too.
or... No, I think he won just the 6th. He had one last election where he was like 1 seat up on the other, and he ended up losing, getting booted out. Okay, New Brunswick.
Wow, okay.
New Brunswick. The longest-serving premier in New Brunswick was there for 17 years.
17 years. Well, I'm not sure if he was there for 17 years, but I know he was there for a long time. The thing is, again, if it's much before my lifetime, I won't know. But the one that I know is was Hatfield. Hatfield. That
is correct.
Him?
Richard
Really?
Hatfield was there for 17 years from 1970 to 1987. He was very important in getting equality between French and English in New Brunswick, but led the party to a shutout in 1987. He was the one who led the PCs to that 57-0 victory or loss.
Wait, wasn't that Frank McKenna?
He was the one who won. Hatfield was the one who got creamed.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry. Hatfield got 0. Oh, my God.
Yes, he got 0.
Wow,
Can you name the other 2?
No, I can't.
I don't think you can either.
No, but
this was Andrew Blair. Blair, who was in the 19th century.
I was gonna guess McKenna.
Oh, yeah.
McKenna was there for a decade. Does
No, McKenna wasn't one of them.
3? No, okay.
McKenna wasn't one of them. No,
then I don't know.
It was Andrew Blair, who was there in the 19th century, and John McNair, who was there around World War II. Okay. Nova Scotia. 26 years.
Oh my
God. The longest serving premier in Canadian history, a record holder for all premiers, prime ministers. 26 years, Nova Scotia.
26 years. Was that consecutive? That's
I think it was, yeah.
Oh my God. Quarter century, huh? Okay. I don't know. So I'm going to go for 2nd and 3rd place here. I don't know many in Nova Scotia. Damn. I know who was there during the patriation of the Constitution. I'm going to say Buchanan, but I know it's not him in the first place, but I'm going to say he's the top 3.
Well, it's a Scottish name. It was a good guess, but no. George Murray was the longest-serving premier. He was there from 1896 to 1923. The other 2 were Angus L. MacDonald and William S. Fielding. 0 points for Nova Scotia.
Fielding. Yeah, okay.
Saskatchewan.
Hey, hang on, though. Okay, so we're out of the Atlantic Canada. What's my score now? What's my
score?
You're
at 5 points. 5 points. And I said you need 15 to win.
Okay.
Not too bad. I wasn't sure if you'd get any points in Atlantic Canada.
Okay.
I thought maybe you'd get Hatfield. Okay. Saskatchewan. Longest-serving premier, 17 years.
I mean, it has to be Tommy Douglas. I mean,
and it was Tommy Douglas.
Five majorities, right?
1944 to 1961. Obviously, first kind of socialist government in North America, and universal health care program brought in during his time. Now, can you name the other 2?
Probably not. I'm going to try. I think. Hang on. Radwall was there for a decade. So was Roy Romano, but a decade is not that long. I mean, they tend to go with dynasties over there, right? Again, I'm thinking about the patriation of the Constitution. I'm gonna. What's his name? If I'm wrong, I can't. Okay.
Yeah. Give me a name. Give me a name.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Grant Devine.
No. It was
No?
Walter Scott who was second. He was their first premier. And Alan Blakeney.
Alan Blakeney, I knew him. It was just before
Yes.
Devine. Okay. Really?
All
Was
right.
there longer? Devine was there for more than a decade, wasn't he? Okay. All right.
He was there for maybe 10 years, but Blakeney was there for 11. Okay.
Whatever.
Manitoba. The longest serving premier in Manitoba was there for 20 years.
Oh, God. And Manitoba is an old province. Wasn't the fifth to join? It was, right? In
Yeah.
1870?
Yeah.
It was the fifth,
Yeah.
yeah. 20 years, no idea. Like, politicians don't last 20 years. Well, nice. Cutmo may get there, but eventually. Okay, I don't know the first place, so I'm going to shoot for second place or third. I mean, we we had a quiz about who had the most seats. And Gary Dewar was there for a long time. I think he was there for a decade. I'm going to say, it was Gary Dewar in the top three?
He was not. He was
God
not.
damn it.
Longest serving premier was John Bracken. He was there from 1922 to 1943. He's the reason that the progressive conservatives have the name progressive. He was a progressive premier, and he had that as his condition for becoming the national conservative leader.
Interesting.
The other two were Rodman Roblin and Thomas Greenway. These are both over 100 years ago. I didn't think you'd get them.
Yeah, if our listeners scream at me, come on, give me a break from Manitoba. Okay, all right.
Okay, so you only need 2 more points to pass. You're 7 points short to win. Alberta, longest serving premier, 25 years.
25. Well, okay. Damn, dude, they stayed a long time. Okay, well, that's okay. So it's not Peter Lougheed, although I would think Lougheed would be in the top 3, but I'm not saying Peter Lougheed. I'm gonna 25. I didn't think it was that. I'm gonna say Manning.
Correct. Ernest Manning, 1943 to 1968.
Wasn't sure about the
Father of
first
Preston.
name. Okay.
Yeah.
So okay,
Can you name
Manning.
number 2?
I can't. But I'm. Thing is, those early governments. I'm gonna say Peter Lougheed. Was he second or third?
It was Peter Lougheed,
Really?
1971
All right.
to 1985. Can you get a sweep? Can you get 6 points? Who was third?
How long was Ralph Klein in power? He was there for a long time, huh? But less than. Okay, I'm gonna say Ralph Klein.
And that is correct. Ralph
Oh my
Klein,
God,
1992
really?
to 2006. Perfect score. Philippe, you're at 14 points. You have passed.
Wow.
And you're very close to being able to win. All right, we're going to go through these. The last one
I
is
can't
British
believe
Columbia.
I got this right. Okay.
British Columbia. Premier was there for 20 years.
I have no idea. I'm sorry. British Columbia for me is 20 years. Again, I'm going to shoot for second or third place, and I'm probably not going to get it. I mean, the 70s. Bennett? Was it Bennett?
You're going to have to be a bit more specific.
Oh, there's more than one Bennett. The Bennett in the 70s. William?
I will accept.
Bill Bennett,
Well, actually,
right?
you have to be even more specific than
No,
that. They're
get outta
both in the
here, really?
70s. Yeah, it was father and son.
Okay, father. I don't know. Sorry. It's like saying Daniel Johnson in Quebec, right? Although neither of those lasted very long. Father. I don't know.
I will give you. I will give you a half point for that. It was the father, W.A.C. Bennett, who was there from 1952 to 1972. He was the
But he's
first
not the
so-called premier.
longest, though. He's not the longest, is he?
He was 20
He
years.
was the
yeah.
longest. Wow.
W.A.C. Bennett or Whack
Wow.
Bennett, Wacky Bennett.
Okay.
Can you name number 2 or number 3?
No, but I'm gonna
I'm
say
not gonna-
I'm gonna say Bennett's son.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not going to give you that. That's too easy now. Second was Richard McBride, and third was Bill Bennett. And see, W.A.C. Bennett was there from 52 to 72, and Bill Bennett from 75 to 86. So you have passed. You're at 15 and a half points.
Wow.
So let's see if we can run up the numbers in these last two provinces, which you will do well in at least one of them.
Should know. Yeah, okay.
Quebec. 18 years, longest serving premier.
It would be Maurice Duplessis.
That is correct. 1936 to 1939, and then 1944 to 1959. Second and third.
He had to die to
Yeah, they
to
had
get beaten.
to drag
he had
him out.
to die. Yeah.
Yeah.
The second thing is, Quebec had a lot of premiers in the 1800s. Unlike, I don't think there's. I mean, 18 is the longest with. So I don't think it's one of the early ones. Taschereau was there forever. I'm going to say the second one, I'm going to say Louis-Alexandre Taschereau.
And it was Louis-Alexandre Taschereau, 1920, 1936. Can you run the table and get the third?
That's 16 years, right?
That's 16 years.
I mean, Robert Bourassa won 4 majorities, so that should be 16 years. I mean, he won at 70. No. Wait, yeah. No, still he called an early election, so that would be 70 to 76. That's 6 years. Then he won in 85, and he quit in 92. I'm going to say Robert Bourassa.
It was Lomar Gouin.
Lomar Gouin just before Taschereau. Oh, okay.
That's
right.
Did but you're at 20 and a half points.
I did better in Alberta than I did in Quebec. That's
embarrassing. Wow.
Ontario. I'm not gonna.
Ontario.
I'm not
23
gonna
years, longest serving premier in Ontario.
Years.
I will be impressed if you know this one.
I won't. I'm gonna shoot for second and third place. 23 years. Okay, so it's not any of the recent ones. Not even close. I mean, McGuinty won 3 elections, but that's like with 10 years, so it's not even close. It's not Frank Miller, that's for sure. I'm just going back in my head. Okay, so how long did you say? 23 years?
23 years.
So it has to be one of the early ones. I don't know the answer, but if I get it wrong, I can guess, because I think I know 2 and 3. I don't know 1. Who would that be? That's such a long time, though. Okay.
An answer, sir.
Yeah. Mowat.
Yes!
No way!
It was Oliver Mowat. Yes.
Really?
I'm impressed that you got that. 1872 to 1896. And if you like decentralization and provincial jurisdiction, you can thank Oliver Mowat. He fought John A. Macdonald for provincial rights. Do you know the second and the third?
I mean, Bill Davis stayed there forever. I'm not sure if he's... I'm going to say Bill Davis.
And it was Bill Davis, 1971 to 1985. Can you complete the sweep in Ontario?
It's an old one, isn't it? Right? It's the third. Because since Bill Davis, there hasn't been like a long dynasty. It's been 1 or 2... Oh, hang on, though. There was pre-war. Hepburn?
No, it wasn't Hepburn.
No?
But
He did stay
that
a
was
while,
an answer to a question a while ago that you didn't get. No, it was Leslie Frost.
Leslie Frost.
So you have 25 and a half points, which is well above the 15 points that I gave you credit for. So if anything, I'm the one who was wrong here. I thought you would have trouble. Well done. I am impressed. Very well done. Very well done.
That was hard. Thing is, you go with the most famous ones, right? Again, you tell me 23 years, I know it's old. I mean, what's the longest current premier sitting? Who is it? Legault is 18.
It's Trudeau.
Premier,
and after Trudeau, it's...
It's not Mo, although his party is in power.
It might actually be Mo. He was in 2018. Was Legault...
Legault's...
I think 2018 is the longest serving. Yeah. So Ford, Legault, and Moe would be the longest. Eby is very recent. Smith is recent.
Smith is recent. Manitoba is
Canoe is
recent.
recent.
Yeah. Doug Ford.
Higgs was in 2018.
Doug Ford was in 2018
Higgs was in 2018.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doug Ford was
so I think
earlier
it's that crew
in
of
2018.
the 2018. Yes.
In the Maritimes, they all changed.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the crew of only 2018. So the longest serving premiers have only been there for
6 years.
6 years or less.
It's Doug Ford, the first one. It was in June, right? Wow.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Okay.
Justin Trudeau would be the longest serving governing leader at the moment.
Who's gonna be the longest among those among that 2018 crew? Higgs, Legault, or Ford? Oh,
Ford.
I think so too. Yeah.
Ford.
Legault.
Out of the ones who face an election in 2026, I would give Ford the best chance of winning. So
That's
another
true.
2 more years at least for Ford, and I'm not sure. I mean, Moe will probably end up. But we'll see. Maybe he doesn't want to stick around. Who knows? Anyway, congratulations for that. He knew his provincial premiers. He didn't need a hint. Well done. Hats off to you. And listeners, let us know how you did. Let's wrap this up quickly. Number of the week. I've got 137. It's the Liberal support among non-Francophones in Quebec in the Léger poll. The Conservatives were at 29. Maybe it's just a small thing. Maybe it's just, a sample thing. But an only 8-point lead among non-Francophones for the federal Liberals in Quebec.
Yeah.
Hey, some of the seats on the West Island? I don't know.
Oh, those margins are so high, though. I know what you're saying, though. Those margins are really high.
What is it, Outremont, Mount Royal? Which one's the one the Conservatives always do okay?
Oh, it's always Montreal, but the thing is, they're facing Anthony Housefather. It's not happening.
Right. But anyway, an interesting development, something to watch.
I'm sorry, with all that commotion, I don't think I have a number. My number is that I had 3 premiers in Alberta and only 2 in Quebec on that poll. I'm gonna have 2 numbers of the week next week because I'm too emotional right now. But
okay,
yes,
all right. It was an emotional podcast. Yeah, highs and lows.
Merci
Thanks
beaucoup,
very
Éric.
much to everybody for listening, and of course, go to thenumberspod.ca to join our Patreon. You can join our Discord. You can ask us questions for the podcast. We have lots of discussions there, and you get your exclusive episodes every second week. So we'll have one next week for our patrons only. So if you want to hear it, you don't want to miss it, go to thenumberspod.ca. And Philippe, bask in your success, but also recover, because I feel like it took a lot out of you.
I can't believe I had Moet. Okay.
That was a deep pull. I was very impressed. Very, very, very good. I'm proud of you. I'm proud
Merci
of you.
beaucoup. You know what? Next week I'm gonna throw you a softball just for you. All right.
That's kind of an insult, but okay, sure. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week. Merci.